I guess one of the sort of functions of you being this kind of different type of organisation that's more overtly political is that you have a similar tension to the one that Labour's dealing with at the moment, which is they're simultaneously trying to campaign to win an election and think about the right messaging to do that, and also think about governing after an election that they are likely to win. And those two things don't necessarily lead you to the same conclusions all the time. And in a lot of your work, you're trying to think about policy, but you're also trying to think about the messaging that goes with that policy and how you sell it to an electorate. How do you balance that tension in your work?
Yeah, I think that the connection between those things, politics and policy, thinking about the tensions, the overlaps, how each informs the other, that is the productive space that makes, I hope, what we do, mostly in private, useful. And I think, to some extent, the tension can be overdone a little bit because it's really about how your political incentives change at different political moments. So right now, this election will be a referendum on the government. This is about the Conservative Party. It's about their failure over 14 years. It's about internal divisions within the Conservative Party. And frankly, if time for change means we're fed up with that lot, that's a perfectly legitimate type of election to fight after 14 years. That will change very quickly because at that point, the electoral coalition that Labour will have, which to a large degree will be about Conservative 2019 voters either staying at home or registering their protest by voting for the Reform Party, Labour will then have to sort of bind and unify its own electoral coalition rather than benefiting from the complete implosion of their opponents. And what's interesting about that is, and this is some thinking we've been doing very recently, all over the world, Biden, Albanese, Schultz, these leaders tended to win elections after the basically populist right, who were their opponents, had imploded in government. Their populism failed when it came into contact with actual political decision-making. So the centre-left won, not really because it had a sort of neatly worked out, tied up with a bow political project, but because their opponents completely imploded. Now, there are certain preconditions for the centre-left to have benefited. They had to have professional parties. They needed to be focused on working people and not on themselves. They needed to be seen to put the country first, etc. But fundamentally, they benefited from the implosion of their opponents. And then they win, and then they struggle. Biden has delivered huge policy changes, but is struggling still. Albanese, just lost a major constitutional referendum and is struggling. Schultz is now polling behind the AfD. So there is this interesting international problem, which is that the centre-left are winning, but they are winning largely because the right has swung to the right, essentially gone populist, and therefore, when it hits government, is really, blowing up in a major way. And that poses the political question, what does it mean to govern from the centre-left in a way that is focused on winning an election after one way you've benefited from the implosion of your opponents? And that, I think, is the central political question if Labour are lucky enough to win the next election.
And what's the answer to that question? Because that is the question that we're all mulling over. And you make a really, really good point that we have seen, centre-left governments come in. They're often one-term centre-left government. And as you say, Biden's done a really good job, but it's somehow not cutting through. Let's see how he does at the election. But that is the big question. That's the question that we ponder heavily on this podcast. How does Labour not just win, and scrape over the line, but change Britain for the better, win 2 terms in a very harsh fiscal climate?
Yeah, I think the bottom line is that you have to be political about how you govern. And that means all kinds of things, which, I'd love to talk about. But the sort of hardest thing that it means is that delivering on policy in and of itself is not enough. Deliverism is not enough. The Inflation Reduction Act is a case in point. But I think what it means is that, and this is always a challenge for the centre-left, we think that if we identify, 10 big policies and then we do them, job done. Voters will somehow feel it and will notice those 10 big policies. And then, we can all go home and voters will reward us and that's how you win the next election. It really overestimates that, how much working people in Western democracies who have voted for the populist right but can be won back, how disconnected they are from the sorts of levers that you can pull in Parliament or in Whitehall. There's a big gap between those things. So the central thing that you need to do is put the experience of working people, people who are economically insecure, people who are politically disengaged, at the heart of everything you do in government.